Tonight, startling allegations that sloppy police work may have compromised several murder investigations.
And now the KHOU 11 News I-Team has uncovered a major internal investigation currently underway at the Houston Police Department.
Investigative reporter Jeremy Rogowski is here with the details. Jeremy?
We are talking indeed about the prospect of mishandled murder cases. Specifically, sources tell us when someone was killed in Houston, some HPD detectives allegedly didn't work up the case properly, or potentially worse yet, didn't work it at all.
Houston police must handle some 200 homicides a year, but now it's HPD's own investigators under investigation. According to Chief Charles McClelland, the HPD Internal Affairs Division is conducting an ongoing investigation in regards to investigative procedures in the Homicide Division. Until this investigation is completed, there will be no further details or information released. An attorney with the Houston Police Officers Union also confirms the probe is ongoing. And while no one is talking publicly about specifics, multiple sources tell the I-Team at least dozens of homicides are under review, and that some of those cases date back several years. So far, at least 2 homicide detectives have been reassigned. HPD isn't saying when it launched the internal investigation, but sources say it likely won't wrap up anytime soon.
And that's because the scope of this investigation, or audit as it's being described to us, is large enough to require weeks, if not months, to complete. And again, it involves the alarming prospect of some homicide cases either not worked up properly or not worked up at all. I'm Jeremy Rogowski, KHOU 11 News.
An internal investigation of the Houston Police Homicide Squad could end up sending shockwaves throughout the department.
That's what Mayor Anise Parker told the KHOU 11 News I-Team today after we broke the story that sloppy police work may have compromised multiple murder cases.
Investigative reporter Jeremy Rogowski joins us now with what else the mayor had to say. Jeremy?
Homicide investigators, Mayor Parker says, are supposed to be the best of the best at HPD. It's why, if in fact some of them failed to investigate murder cases properly, the mayor says that could destroy public trust.
It'll have shockwaves throughout the department.
That's what will happen, Mayor Parker says, if HPD determines its own homicide squad failed to investigate murders the way it should.
What does that do for the public trust, faith, and confidence in the police department?
It destroys it. There's no other nice way to say that.
Multiple sources tell the I-Team the scope of the internal affairs investigation covers at least dozens of homicide cases, some dating back several years, and that so far at least 2 homicide detectives have been reassigned. Parker says investigating the loss of human life is the most important job a police department does.
A homicide investigator, that's the elite of the police department. Those are the guys who have risen up out of the pack.
The mayor wouldn't comment on details of the investigation until HPD's internal probe is complete. But she did say anytime officers are accused of failing to do their job duties, it's cause for concern.
Obviously, if it's the homicide division, that would be a greater level of anxiety and concern.
So far, HPD Chief Charles McClelland has not commented on all of this, other than to say it's, quote, an examination of investigative procedures at the Homicide Division. But McClelland is set to talk to the media tomorrow afternoon. We'll be there and let you know what he has to say. Jeremy Rogowski, KHOU 11 News.
New information now on an internal investigation going on at the Houston Police Department.
Today, the I-Team confirmed an officer is off the job, stripped of his police powers amid allegations of mishandled murder cases.
Investigative reporter Jeremy Rogowski broke this story and is back now with an update. What do you know, Jeremy?
Well, Greg and Len, that officer is a former homicide sergeant who's had to turn in his badge and must stay at home during work hours, while HPD Internal Affairs tries to get to the bottom of all this.
Pledging openness and transparency, Chief Charles McClelland says if there's a problem with the way murder cases are handled,
we're willing to admit it, and we are willing to fix it.
McClelland says he himself initiated the internal investigation of the homicide squad after questions were raised about policies and procedures there. Multiple sources tell the I-Team that could mean at least dozens of homicides not investigated properly or not at all. Yet the chief's quick to point out
these are allegations, and sometimes allegations turn out to be true and sometimes not to be true.
But they are serious enough that HPD has already relieved one officer of duty as the investigation continues. While not considered disciplinary action, the former homicide sergeant is stripped of police powers for the time being.
Just because you're relieved of duty does not mean that you're guilty of anything.
Both the police officers union and the chief say all of this has not shaken their confidence in HPD homicide.
If one of my loved ones was murdered in this city, I would want the Houston Police Department Homicide Division to conduct that investigation and no other law enforcement agency. That's how confident I am.
Meantime, the police union points out that HPD's clearance rate for homicide cases was 80% just last month. That's better, they say, than the national average. Jeremy Rogowski, KHOU 11 News.
Tonight, the I-Team uncovers new information about the embattled Houston Police Homicide Squad.
We were first to report how the unit was under internal review for allegedly doing sloppy investigative work like not developing leads.
And now Jeremy Rogowski shows us how some homicide supervisors may have been asleep at the wheel.
HPD Sergeant Ryan Chandler is off the job and can't carry a badge or gun while Internal Affairs reviews dozens of his cases. But on paper, you would never know anything was wrong.
This is a story about contradictions. When you look at how he handled homicide cases,
it appears it was physical trauma.
Sergeant Ryan Chandler was outstanding. At least that's what his employee evaluations say year after year. But the I-Team dug deeper and found something interesting. You see, every one of his reviews in 2011 and 12 was virtually identical, seemingly copied and pasted.
When you saw this with respect to this one sergeant, what did you think?
Laziness.
We showed University of Houston criminal justice professor Larry Carson what we found. In 4 straight job reviews, supervisors wrote Chandler demonstrates a high degree of integrity and is reliable and dependable. And when they wrote he is persistent in his investigations, they even copied the misspelling. 2 T's instead of 1.
The idea that you're only cutting and pasting brings into question, are you really evaluating them? Or are you just going out and having a beer after a quick cut and paste?
And what's more, the professor says,
and the next question is, are you really supervising your people, or are they going off the reservation?
And it wasn't just the same supervisor always using the same language, but rather 3 different lieutenants going word for word.
We asked the police union if that was acceptable. While President Ray Hunt wouldn't comment about Chandler's specific case,
I believe at HPD our supervisors are on top of our subordinates, but are they going back and checking every single thing that you do? And the answer is no.
Hunt says there's just not enough manpower to do those kind of reviews. But should there be, when some of HPD's elite investigators are now under investigation themselves?
Is there a culture within that division of not paying attention to their evaluation process and therefore not also paying attention to what their officers are doing?
Meantime, an HPD spokesperson had no comment, and the union says neither does Ryan Chandler, while the Internal Affairs investigation is ongoing. Jeremy Rogowski, KHOU 11 News.
But first, more on that big shakeup within the Houston Police Department.
8 homicide detectives have been disciplined since we first told you about HPD's crackdown on sloppy murder investigations. Investigative reporter Jeremy Rogowski joins us with more on the story he broke. Jeremy?
Well, again, HPD says a total of 24 cases were mishandled, most of them by one single sergeant, now fired, who the chief flat out calls a liar.
When we mess up, we fess up, and we clean up.
The mess up HPD Chief Charles McClellan's pledging to clean up is sloppy police work in 24 homicide division cases, investigations with leads not followed, field work not documented, or reports not timely done.
What allowed this to happen is we did have weak procedures and processes in place.
After a 5-month-long internal probe, the I-Team first exposed the chief disciplined aide on the force. Officers B. Oxspring, R. Moreno, L. Lovelace, and K. Carr's punishment ranges from a reprimand to 10 days off. HPD also disciplined supervisors, including Sergeant B. Roberts and Lieutenants R. Lakin and J. McGallen.
Hey, Sergeant.
And this man, Sergeant Ryan Chandler, was fired. Chandler's linked to 21 of the 24 cases with problems.
He was a liar. He was not forthright with his supervisors.
I don't believe that to be a true statement.
The police union is appealing Chandler's termination.
That may be the chief's impression, and I think we'll be able to punch some holes in that, certainly at the time of the evidentiary hearing we have on the appeal.
Meantime, HPD says 2 other homicide cases not handled properly had been assigned to Ed Gonzalez. The Houston City Council member said it was an oversight that he took those files home with him when he retired from HPD in 2009.
Should not have happened. It was wrong.
Now the chief told us that 15 cases have since been cleared, but 9 remain open. He said HPD has contacted victims' families to tell them that investigators are now pursuing all workable leads. But clearly, a lot of time has been lost. Jeremy Rogowski, KHOU 11 News.
The I-Team has uncovered new records showing sloppy police work done by some Houston homicide investigators. Jeremy Rogowski broke the story and has the shocking new details.
If you're trying to solve a homicide, you'd think you would at least go to the crime scene, right? Well, for one former HPD sergeant, think again. Hey, Sergeant.
We now know much more behind the firing of former Houston Police Sergeant Ryan Chandler. These disciplinary records obtained by the I-Team show how in a fatal stabbing, he failed to even go to the crime scene, claiming there was no crime scene, even though there was a blood trail and potential witnesses.
He was lazy. He was a liar.
HPD Chief Charles McClellan didn't mince words when announcing Chandler's termination last week, and the newly released records speak to that laziness, claiming Chandler was beyond late in completing reports. In one case, 1.5 years. In others, 2.5 years, or even almost 3 years late. But yet, it wasn't caught by supervisors.
They put a lot of trust and confidence in Ryan Chandler. He was able to exploit that trust and confidence.
And in more than one case, the disciplinary records show Chandler may have engaged in criminal activity by falsifying documents, claiming he referred cases to a grand jury when in fact he didn't. That misled the family of the victim.
The Montgomery County District Attorney was called in to review Chandler's actions, and that office says there was not enough evidence to support criminal charges. But it also says HPD sent over only a handful of all the Chandler cases internal affairs investigated. Jeremy Rogowski, KHOU 11 News.